Well, welcome. We're glad that y'all were able to join us. We have a group of extension economists here from around the southern region. We're talking about the meat side of the protein market today and kind of the impacts that COVID-19 have had on those markets. And so this video, we're going to have Dr. Josh Maples out of Mississippi State talk to us a little bit about what's happening in the beef market. So Josh, I'll just go ahead and throw it your way.
Well, thank you, Justin. I'm going to try to get the screen share going here to just put up a few charts for us to consider as we talk. So we've seen it in the headlines everywhere. I mean, this has been national news discussion that we were seeing sharp decreases in beef production the last couple of weeks due to concerns at packing plants. So I think it's really good that we're having this discussion and talking about the meat side of it and just what's happening with particular cuts. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the beef production side. We know about the supply concerns. I want to focus more on kind of what's happening with beef. So if we look at, let's see if there we go. So if we look at boxed beef cutout value, so this really is the idea here is that after the meat has been cut up, the beef has been cut up, you kind of put the carcass back together and with values of the individual primals. So really trying to look at how much the value of the beef and put it back together in the carcass value. So we've seen a big spike, but I do want to point out that originally we saw a jump up into the first part of April, and then we saw a decline. That was back before we were really talking about the significant disruptions that we're seeing now. And so I think that's going to kind of be a theme here. And what we're going to end up seeing in the next couple of slides is we've really seen it depending on where the cuts are going as to what the reaction has been due to COVID-19. So spiking boxed beef cutout value, and again, this cutout value doesn't represent all beef that's traded during the week. There are some forward purchases, quite a bit of forward purchasing. So it's not like this is the price that was, this value doesn't necessarily represent the amount of beef that moves within that given week. So I think that's something important to consider, that these supply chains, they rely on some planning in the weeks ahead. So I want to look at first chuck prices. This is the one that really, since the beginning of the COVID-19 disruption, has been surging. You'll see that unlike the boxed beef cutout, we never really had a dip in the wholesale beef chuck prices. And the reason for that is the chuck primal is the one that most frequently moves through retail. So this is the kind of stuff you're typically buying at grocery stores. A lot of the ground beef at grocery stores are coming from chuck. So we've really seen a spike in this really since the beginning. So with the shift from retail or from food service to retail, we saw a jump, and we've just continued to see that jump. Kind of alternative to that is if we look at the ribeye. So, ribeye is a lot more dependent. We do buy a lot of ribeyes at grocery stores too, but it is dependent on food service as well to a big extent. And so you don't see just the continual spike in ribeye prices. We actually saw a pretty good drop in ribeye prices during the first few weeks of the disruption. Since then, due to the supply shocks, we've seen this turn back around and it's surging once again. But I think it's really interesting to think about, where the products go and the effect that has on the values. I think this is the last one to talk about, wholesale boneless beef prices. So this is 50% lean. So this one's typically a food service product, and you'll see that, mid to late March, we saw this one drop off pretty significantly. And then since then, it's taken back off. So, that shift in ground beef, I think we're seeing some of this probably be shifted towards retail, even though this is a traditional food service product. And we've seen this really pick back up. So I think it's leading us, and I'll stop sharing here and come back. I think we're really seeing the dynamics of the market for each individual cut is playing out. And I think it's important to always think about beef is not just one product. Beef is a lot of individual products. And we're seeing some we're seeing these markets direct beef to where they're demanded, and we're also seeing prices reflect what's happening for each individual cut.
Great. Well, thanks, Josh. Does anybody have a question for Josh?
Hey, Josh. So a common question that's been coming up in the media is: are we going to have enough like ground beef for people that are at the grocer and the retail level? What would you say to people that ask that kind of question in terms of, do you think we'll have enough ground beef in the future and in the weeks coming?
Yeah, that's a good question, and the word shortage gets tossed around a lot. We've got plenty of cattle out there. That's not a problem, and I know that's not what we're talking about today. This is really a processing bottleneck, right? So it's all really going to depend on how long the processing situation extends. I don't suspect we're talking. I really think we're looking at more individual supply chains and where they're sourcing their ground beef from, and if they're having issues, then we are going to see some. We're already seeing some issues at local stores. But overall, I think the product's going to be there, especially if we can get through these processing disruptions relatively soon.
Do you expect any impacts on international trade, things that we import and export as a result of this in the short run, Josh?
That's a great question, Kenny, and I would certainly be happy to hear your thoughts and others' thoughts on that one too. But I do think we're going to see some impact, and I think we saw some impact in the latest trade data for March, given what the prices were doing. The lower prices at that point, and then how that flips over into April. So I guess I'll toss it back to you. Given what happened in March with trade data, kind of what are you thinking for April?
Well, my guess is that it's going to, like we'd all expect, it's going to lead to some more increased interest in imports, and countries looking to push more beef this way. Now that always brings about some questions too, but I think that's what I expect to happen. It'll be interesting too to see if it impacts the beef that we export. It's probably not going to impact the export of those beef products that are not in high demand here in the United States, but in situations where it may be, I think we may actually see exports go down. So would be my guess. I'm open to anybody else's thoughts too.
I kind of think that's what's going to happen too. If I'm some other company in another country, we look like a pretty attractive market. If you look, because most of our imports are trimmings for ground beef, this looks like a pretty darn good place to be trying to sell some beef. So, that to me, that argues for more imports, and we ought to be a little less competitive in some export markets too. So, that's kind of what I expect to see happen over the next couple of months as this unfolds.
Yeah, I think those are great points, David. I wanted to kind of ask you quickly as we're having this discussion. We're right on the cusp of grilling season. It's here, and that's something I failed to mention in my discussion, that seasonally this is the time where we see that boxed beef cut out. Be its highest of the year as we prepare for grilling season. What does that look like this year?
I think everybody probably going to want to go out and fire up the grills and the smokers, but there isn't going to, it's going to be pretty tight at the grocery store. So I don't know what that looks like, because it's tight for all of them. I don't know how that works out, quite honestly. Sure, tighter supplies and higher prices, you would think. Yeah. Another little twist on that too is, I've had the opportunity to visit a little bit with folks who are barbecue restaurant people, and this is really hitting them hard. Particularly on the Texas side, brisket is such an important part of a Texas barbecue restaurant, and every animal we slaughter only has 2 of them, and so when you look at 40% less daily slaughter of fed steers and heifers on some days last week, they're really getting hit hard by, doubling, tripling, quadrupling of prices for briskets at that kind of at the looking at primal cut values. So, I mean, this is I think this is going to be hard on all of our restaurants. That's one kind of restaurant I sure like to go to, and they're going to suffer from. They are suffering from a really bad double whammy. Just as they're trying to reopen everywhere. You know, Andrew talked about ribs on an earlier video, but our whole, you know, pork butts, ribs, briskets, you know, all that stuff, sausage, these prices are skyrocketing. And my understanding is they're already getting hit by higher prices and being called by their suppliers and telling them, you know, either we don't have anything or we're going to cut you way back on what your normal order is just because we don't have it. I think it's got some of them scrambling to think about what else can they do? Are there some alternatives? Are there some relatively cheaper cuts? Are there some things they can get? I've heard of some of them been doing catfish night. You know, they're going to do some fried catfish, you know. And so I think a lot of little restaurants are scrambling to figure out what's going to happen.
Well, very good. That was a great discussion. We appreciate everyone joining us, and hopefully we'll see you on the next video. Thank you.